The Silence of Sprunki, Part 1. It started with an unusual call. My apartment was dimly lit as the rain outside painted streaks against the windows. I had been deep in thought, piecing together samples for a track that just wasn't coming together. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. Is this the producer? The voice was distorted, like someone was speaking through layers of static. Yeah, who's asking? I tried to sound nonchalant, masking the creeping unease that climbed up my spine. You've been chosen, the voice replied, ignoring my question entirely. Sprunki Studios. Restore it. Create the masterpiece. You'll be compensated more than you can imagine. The mention of Sprunki Studios stopped me cold. Every musician, every producer worth their salt knew the legends. That place was a beacon of inspiration, once the birthplace of humanity's greatest melodies. But it had been abandoned for years, whispered about only in hushed tones. Rumors spread about what had happened to the Sprunki, the mystical, musical creatures who lived within the studio. Some said they'd been hunted down. Others claimed they'd vanished, leaving behind a curse. But most terrifying were the tales of those who entered the studio recently. None came back. What kind of game is this? I asked, though my voice betrayed my intrigue. You'll understand when you arrive. The address will be sent. Time is running out. The call ended abruptly. The next day, I found myself standing before the gates of Sprunki Studios, a massive, rusted structure that seemed to groan with its own weight. The surrounding forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. The world felt muted, almost like the place was sucking the sound out of the air. Pushing open the gates, I stepped into what could only be described as a mausoleum for music. The studio's facade was covered in overgrown vines, its once vibrant logo barely visible beneath layers of grime. Yet, there was an inexplicable pull, an undercurrent of sound. Faint, haunting melodies whispered at the edge of hearing, compelling me forward. Inside, the studio was a wreck. Broken instruments lay scattered across the floor, their strings and keys twisted into grotesque shapes. Sheet music was torn and strewn about, the notes scribbled over as if by a frenzied hand. And yet, there was something alive about the place. A presence. That's when I saw it. A figure, half hidden in the shadows of the mixing room. It was small, no taller than a child, but its silhouette was unmistakable. It was a Sprunki, or what was left of one. Its body flickered with faint pulses of light, but its once glowing aura had dimmed. Its eyes glared red like burning embers, and its movements were jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled hand. Beatmaker Resonator? I whispered, recognizing the creature from old stories. The Sprunki turned, and for a moment, its eyes softened. A loop of beats began to emanate from it, familiar, rhythmic, but the sound warped, turning into something discordant and menacing. The beats accelerated, their intensity mimicking a heartbeat in full panic. I stepped back, heart pounding. The studio wasn't abandoned, it was alive. And the Sprunki were still here. But they weren't the creatures humanity once revered. They were something far worse. The Silence of Sprunki, Part 2. The beat from Beatmaker Resonator grew louder, reverberating in my chest like a warning siren. I could feel the bass drops shaking the cracked floor beneath my feet. It was as if the creature was communicating, not through words, but through sound. A threat. A challenge. Easy, buddy, I muttered, holding my hands up as if calming a stray dog. But the Sprunki didn't seem interested in diplomacy. Its glowing red eyes locked onto mine, and the beat twisted into an erratic, distorted rhythm. A flash of light burst from its body, and suddenly, I was on my back, gasping for air. The sound wave had hit me like a truck. All right, I wheezed, pushing myself upright. You want me to leave? Not happening. The moment I said it, the beat stopped. The silence that followed was oppressive, like I'd stepped into a vacuum. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Resonator tilted its head, studying me. It was waiting for something. Instinctively, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small portable keyboard. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some desperate attempt to speak its language. My fingers moved across the keys, playing a simple chord progression. Soft, inviting. The Sprunki's lights flickered. For a brief moment, the red in its eyes dimmed, replaced by a softer, amber glow. But then the beat returned, harsh and aggressive, and Resonator darted deeper into the studio, disappearing into the shadows. I followed the faint echoes of the beat down a hallway lined with shattered platinum records. The walls were covered in graffiti-like scratches, chaotic scribbles that seemed to mock the music that had once been created here. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and the faint whisper of voices, melodic yet mournful, began to rise around me. At the end of the hallway, I reached the main recording booth. The glass window separating the booth from the control room was cracked but intact, offering a view of the space within. There, sitting in a corner, was another Sprunki, the monochord vocalist. Its once silver body was tarnished, its smooth surface covered in jagged cracks that leaked a faint, silvery mist. As I stepped closer, it raised its head, and I froze. Its mouth opened, not to sing, but to scream. The sound was piercing, unnatural, and it sliced through me like a blade. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the scream wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, waves of cold dread washing over me, a deep, primal fear that rooted me in place. Images flickered in my mind. Endless darkness, the crushing weight of failure, the faces of people I'd let down. I dropped to my knees, trembling. "Stop," I gasped, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the Sprunki or to the visions. But the scream didn't stop. It grew louder, each note resonating with raw emotion. Anger, pain, despair. This wasn't just a scream. It was a cry for help. I fumbled with the keyboard, barely able to focus. My fingers moved on autopilot, piecing together a melody, something soft and warm to counter the vocalist's anguish. The first notes stumbled out, fragile and uncertain, but as the melody grew, the scream began to waver. The mist around the Sprunki's body slowed its flow, curling in gentle spirals. Its mouth closed, and the room fell silent once more. For a moment, the vocalist stared at me, its cracked body trembling. Then it turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a faint trail of silver mist. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Two down, I thought, though I wasn't sure if I'd calmed them or just delayed their wrath. The studio seemed to shift around me, its walls groaning like a living thing. I didn't feel like I was alone anymore, and I was right. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something slithering in the dark corners of the control room. A low, rumbling sound filled the space, like the growl of a distant thunderstorm. The secretive bassist. I turned slowly, my heart sinking. There, partially obscured by shadows, was the creature. Its body was almost invisible, blending seamlessly with the darkness. But its sound, heavy, resonant, like the tolling of a massive bell, was impossible to ignore. The bassist didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its sound was oppressive, suffocating, like the weight of an entire world pressing down on my chest. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor. "Think," I muttered to myself. "You need to think." The Sprunki weren't attacking randomly. Their sounds, their actions, they were reactions, reflections. If I could find the right melody, the right notes, I could reach them. But to do that, I had to get closer to the bassist, to the sound that threatened to crush me. I forced myself to stand, clutching my keyboard like a shield. Each step toward the bassist felt like walking through molasses, every vibration of its sound pulling me down. But I kept moving, fingers trembling over the keys. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's see if you can handle this." And then, I played. The Silence of Sprunki, Part 3. The bassist's sound wrapped around me like a vice, tightening with every step. My body felt like it might implode under the sheer weight of its resonance. But I had no choice. I had to play. The first note I struck was barely audible against the rumbling bass line emanating from the creature. My melody wavered, trembling under the force of its sound. But I pressed on, weaving together a series of deep, grounding chords. The notes were simple, but they resonated in my chest, pushing back against the bassist's overwhelming presence. The room trembled as the bassist reacted. Its massive, shadowy form shifted, the darkness around it curling like smoke. The sound changed, not softer, but different. A low, questioning hum reverberated through the room, as if the creature was listening. "That's it," I whispered, sweat dripping down my face. "Come on." I added layers to the melody, building a harmony that matched the bassist's tone. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to stir something in the creature. The rumbling grew quieter, the pressure in the room easing slightly. For a moment, I thought I had reached it, but then the sound shifted again. Sharp, dissonant. The bassist's growl returned, louder than before, and the shadows surged toward me like a tidal wave. I staggered back, clutching my keyboard. The melody had worked, for a moment, but I hadn't gone far enough. The bassist wasn't just playing music. It was pouring out raw emotion, anger, frustration, loneliness. I had to give it something more. I closed my eyes, letting the bassist's sound wash over me. It wasn't just noise. It was a story, a memory, broken and distorted. I focused on the rhythm, the underlying pulse beneath the chaos. It was steady, like a heartbeat, a foundation. I matched it, playing a single, resonant note in time with the pulse. Then another, and another. Slowly, I built a melody around that foundation, adding depth and texture. The sound was no longer mine alone. It was a collaboration, a conversation. The bassist responded. Its growl softened, the shadows around it receding. For the first time, I saw its form clearly, a towering figure of sleek black, its body pulsing with faint, golden light. Its eyes, hidden before, glowed like twin suns, watching me intently. The melody grew stronger, the bassist's sound weaving into it. Together, we created something new, something whole, and for a moment, the studio felt alive again, not with fear, but with hope. The bassist stepped back, fading into the darkness. Its rumble lingered for a moment longer, then faded to silence. I sank to the floor, my hands trembling. 3 Sprunki down, but I wasn't any closer to understanding what had happened to them, or how to fix it. The weight of their pain, their anger, was overwhelming. They weren't just corrupted, they were broken. The air around me shifted, growing colder. A faint melody drifted through the studio, haunting and beautiful. It was coming from deeper within, calling to me. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The hallway twisted and turned, the walls closing in around me. The faint light from my keyboard cast eerie shadows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The melody grew louder as I reached a heavy, metal door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and a soft glow seeped through the crack. I pushed it open, stepping into a massive chamber. The room was unlike anything I'd seen before. The walls were covered in strange, glowing symbols, pulsating with an otherworldly light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a glowing crystal orb. The melody emanated from the orb, filling the room with its ethereal sound. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something else. Figures moved in the shadows, tall, thin shapes with glowing eyes. These weren't Sprunki. I froze, my heart pounding. The figures didn't approach, but their presence was undeniable. They were watching, waiting. The orb's glow intensified, and the melody shifted. It was no longer ethereal. It was chaotic, fractured. Images flashed in my mind. The Sprunki, bright and vibrant, creating music that resonated with the world. Then darkness, confusion, and pain as something corrupted them, twisting their melodies into something unrecognizable. The orb pulsed, its light flickering. A voice echoed in my mind, soft and melodic, yet filled with sorrow. "Restore us." I reached out to the orb, my fingers brushing its surface. The room vanished, replaced by a swirling void of sound and light. The Sprunki appeared before me, resonator, vocalist, and the bassist, all fractured, their forms flickering like broken holograms. "You have the key," the voice said, "but the final melody must be complete." I understood now. The Sprunki's music was more than sound. It was their essence, their soul. To restore them, I had to piece together the fragments of their melodies. But to do that, I needed to face the source of their corruption. I opened my eyes, finding myself back in the chamber. The figures in the shadows stepped forward, their glowing eyes fixed on me. Their presence was suffocating, but I stood my ground. "Who are you?" I demanded. The tallest figure stepped closer, its form shifting like smoke. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, laced with malice. "We are the silence. The silence of Sprunki." Part 4. The figures, tall, shifting, and unnerving, stood in a semicircle around me. Their glowing eyes pulsed in unison, like silent metronomes keeping time in an empty room. The tallest one stepped closer, its form rippling like smoke in a gale. "We are the silence," it repeated, the words resonating deep in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked, gripping my keyboard tightly. My voice was barely steady, but I held my ground. "Why did you do this to them?" The figure tilted its head, almost amused. "The Sprunki," it rumbled. "They were a beacon, a light that cut through the void. But light attracts shadows." I swallowed hard, the weight of the words pressing down on me. "You corrupted them. You turned them into this." "They turned themselves," the figure corrected. "We are merely the absence, the silence that follows the sound." It was their fear, their doubt, their longing that gave us form. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The Sprunki hadn't been attacked by an external force. They'd been consumed by their own emotions, their own imperfections. The silence was a reflection, a manifestation of everything they tried to suppress. The orb on the pedestal pulsed again, its melody fractured and incomplete. The voice from before whispered in my mind, "Restore us. Complete the melody." I glanced at the Sprunki, their broken forms flickering in and out of existence. Resonator's beats were erratic, like a malfunctioning heart monitor. Vocalist's voice was a faint whisper, its once beautiful tone warped and haunting. The bassist stood motionless, its deep hum barely audible. To restore them, I had to finish their song, a melody that would unify their fragmented pieces. But the silence wasn't going to make it easy. "You cannot fix them," the figure hissed. "Their music is broken, and so are they. Leave, human. Return to your world, and let the silence claim what remains." "Not a chance," I shot back, my voice stronger now. "They're not broken. They're just incomplete, and I'm going to fix it." The silence shifted, its forms moving closer. The air grew heavy, and an unnatural cold seeped into my bones. I placed my hands on the keyboard, fingers trembling but resolute. I started with Resonator. Its beats were chaotic, unpredictable, but there was a rhythm hidden within the noise. I matched it, layering steady chords beneath the erratic loops. The tension in the air thickened as the silence fought back, distorting the sound. But I held firm, weaving a melody that grew stronger with every note. Resonator's eyes flickered, the red glow softening to a warm orange. Its body steadied, the pulses of light growing rhythmic and even. The beats shifted, aligning with the melody I was creating. One down. Next was Vocalist. Its fragmented voice was harder to work with, the notes sharp and jarring. I played a series of gentle, harmonic chords, inviting the Sprunki to join in. It resisted at first, its voice rising in a piercing wail. The silence pressed harder, its shadowy form swirling around me like a storm. I closed my eyes, shutting out the chaos, and played louder. My melody swelled, wrapping around Vocalist's scream like a shield. The dissonance slowly faded, replaced by a clear, resonant tone. Vocalist's form solidified, its cracks beginning to heal. Two down. The bassist was last. Its sound was the heaviest, the most oppressive. The room felt like it might collapse under the weight of its presence. I played a deep, grounding bass line, matching its tone and rhythm. The shadows around me lashed out, their forms writhing and twisting, but I didn't stop. The bass's sound began to shift, the oppressive weight lifting. Its golden light grew brighter, illuminating the room. Three down. The silence shrieked, its forms writhing in fury. "You cannot stop us," the tallest figure roared, its voice like a thunderclap. We are eternal. The silence always returns. The Sprunkies stepped forward, their restored forms glowing with vibrant light. Resonator's beats were steady and powerful. Vocalist's voice was rich and harmonious. The bassist's hum was deep and resonant, anchoring the melody. Together, we played. The Sprunkies' music merged with my own, creating a melody unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was pure, raw, and alive. The room pulsed with light, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter with every note. The silence recoiled, its forms unraveling under the force of the sound. "No!" the tallest figure howled. "This is not the end." But it was. With one final chord, the melody reached its crescendo. The silence shattered, its forms disintegrating into nothingness. The room fell still, the oppressive weight lifting. The Sprunkie turned to me, their glowing forms radiating gratitude. "You have restored us," they said in unison, their voices a harmonious blend. "But the melody is not yet complete." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We played it." "There is one more voice," they replied. "The one who called you here." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The anonymous caller, the one who had orchestrated all of this. One of the Sprunkie had betrayed the others. A faint laugh echoed through the chamber, low and menacing. From the shadows emerged a figure I hadn't seen before. A Sprunkie, its form dark and fractured, its eyes glowing a cold, malevolent blue. "You should have left while you had the chance," it sneered. "Now, the real game begins." The Silence of Sprunki, Part 5. The dark Sprunkie stepped forward, its fractured body radiating malice. Unlike the others, its light wasn't warm or inviting. It was cold, jagged, and seeping with malevolence. The music it emanated was warped, a twisted reflection of the melodies I had just helped restore. "So, you're the one who called me," I said, my voice steady despite the growing dread in my chest. The creature chuckled, a sound like glass scraping on metal. "Of course. Who else would have the foresight? I knew you couldn't resist. Humans never can." The restored Sprunkie, Resonator, vocalist, and the bassist stood beside me, their forms glowing with resolve. "You betrayed us," Resonator growled, its voice a steady, rhythmic pulse. "You let the silence in." The dark Sprunkie tilted its head, feigning innocence. "Betrayal? No, I merely saw potential. The silence gave me power, freedom. It showed me what we could become if we stopped serving humanity." "It destroyed you," vocalist said, its voice trembling with sorrow. "And you destroyed us in turn." The dark Sprunkie ignored the accusation, its glowing blue eyes locking onto me. "But you've meddled enough. You think you've won because you restored their song? You've done nothing but delay the inevitable." The room grew colder as the dark Sprunkie raised its arms, summoning the remnants of the silence. Shadows coalesced around it, swirling and writhing like a living storm. "Let's see if your precious melody can withstand this." The battle began. The dark Sprunkie unleashed its twisted melody, a chaotic blend of sound and silence that tore through the chamber like a gale. The glowing symbols on the walls flickered, struggling to hold their light against the onslaught. I raised my keyboard, my hands moving instinctively. Resonator, vocalist, and the bassist joined me, their combined sounds weaving into a shield against the dark Sprunkie's attack. The clash of music and noise was deafening, the room shaking with the force of it. The dark Sprunkie's melody was relentless, each note laced with despair and fury. It wasn't just trying to overpower us, it was trying to break us, to make us doubt. "You're nothing without us," the dark Sprunkie sneered, its voice cutting through the chaos. "Humanity doesn't deserve our music. They take and take and take until there's nothing left." It was speaking to me, trying to sow the seeds of doubt. And for a moment, it worked. I faltered, my melody stumbling as the weight of its words sank in. "You're wrong," I said, forcing my fingers to keep playing. "Music isn't about taking. It's about sharing, about connection. That's what you've forgotten." The dark Sprunkie laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "And what has that connection brought us? Pain, corruption, silence." The Sprunkie beside me strengthened their melodies, their lights growing brighter. Resonator's beats surged with power, steady and unyielding. Vocalist's voice soared, a cry of defiance against the darkness. The bassist hum deepened, grounding us amidst the storm. Together, we fought back, our combined melody pushing against the dark Sprunki's chaos. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light overpowering the shadows. But the dark Sprunki wasn't finished. It raised its arms, its fractured body trembling with effort. "If I must fall, then so will you," it roared. The silence surged, a tidal wave of darkness rushing toward us. For a split second, it felt like we might lose. But then, the orb at the center of the room pulsed, its melody rising to join ours. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Pure, radiant, and full of life. It wasn't just music, it was hope, the Sprunki's true essence. I played with everything I had, my hands flying over the keyboard. The Sprunki poured their energy into the melody, their lights blazing like stars. The orb's glow intensified, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. The dark Sprunki screamed as the light engulfed it, its form fracturing further until it shattered into fragments of sound and shadow. The silence dissolved, its presence erased by the overwhelming power of the melody. When the light faded, the room was still. The dark Sprunki was gone, its twisted melody silenced. The restored Sprunki stood beside me, their forms glowing with a serene, golden light. "You did it," vocalist said, its voice soft and warm. "The melody is whole." I looked at the orb, now radiating a gentle, pulsing glow. The room felt alive again, the oppressive weight of the silence replaced by a sense of peace. "What happens now?" I asked. Resonator stepped forward, its light flickering gently. "We remain here, guarding the melody. The silence will always be a part of us, but as long as the music plays, it can never take hold again." The bassist rumbled softly. "And you must carry the melody back to your world." "Me?" I said, startled. "But I—" "You've proven yourself," vocalist interrupted. "You restored us. You reminded us of who we are. That melody is yours now." The orb floated toward me, its glow warm and inviting. I reached out, and as my fingers touched its surface, the melody filled me. Every note, every harmony, every beat. It was more than music. It was life. When I opened my eyes, I was standing outside Sprunki Studios. The rain had stopped, and the air was filled with the faint, lingering notes of the melody. I looked back at the studio, its once crumbling facade now glowing faintly with light. The Sprunki were safe, their music restored. And as I walked away, the melody still ringing in my mind, I knew that it wasn't just theirs anymore. It was ours.